Alright, after Firefly, the next character is Jade, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how to build her. I'll start with a detailed explanation of her kit and her Eidolons. Then we look at her best relics, Lightcones, proper energy rotations, and synergies. So leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and let's get started. First, an overview. Jade is a 5-star quantum erudition character with somewhat of a sub-DPS or enabler kind of playstyle. Her kit revolves around dual DPS teams and has a lot of follow-up attacks. Looking at her base stats, she has a decent but okay stat line. Her HP is pretty mid, but her attack and defense are solid. Her speed is 103, which is pretty good for an erudition character, and she has a 140 energy cost ultimate. Moving on to her traces, her basic attack has to be the first of its kind, as it's a blast attack that hits 3 targets and deals minor quantum damage. Her skill is a support ability. She makes a single unit on the team a debt collector for 3 turns. What this does is that it increases that ally's speed by 30, and whenever they attack a target, Jade will do additional quantum damage to them and will consume a bit of HP from the debt collector. But this changes when Jade uses her skill on herself and she herself becomes a debt collector. In that case, she doesn't get the 30 speed increase and she won't consume any HP from herself when she attacks. So one thing to keep in mind from this is that never use Jade's skill on herself, use it on other units. I'm gonna be discussing who is best suited to be the debt collector later in the video. And of course, she cannot use her skill when it's already active. So basically use her skill every 3 turns. Next is her talent. It's a bunch of stuff, so please pay attention. Every time Jade or the debt collector attacks, for every enemy target hit, Jade gets 1 charge, and after she reaches 8 charges, she consumes them and launches an AoE follow-up attack, targeting all enemies and dealing quantum damage to them. That's the first part. Now for every follow-up attack Jade does, she gains 5 stack of Bond Asset, and each stack increases her crit damage by up to 2.4%, and this can go up to 50 stacks, giving a total of 120% crit damage for Jade, making her quite easy to build. Her ultimate is also simple. It's an attack that targets all enemies and deals quantum damage to them, but also it increases her follow-up attack's damage multiplier by up to 80% for 2 times, increasing her overall damage output. But since it's only for 2 follow-up attacks, it won't be active all the time. Lastly, Jade's technique. She will inflict a unique effect to all the enemies within a certain area, and the enemies affected won't attack her. It's a common thing to have on any techniques nowadays. When entering battle, she will deal quantum damage to the enemies and immediately will gain 15 stack of Bond Asset, which entails to around 36% crit damage. Pretty good. In terms of trace priority, her talent and ultimate should be the first to level up, as they are her major source of damage. Next, level up her skill. Since her speed buff to her allies doesn't get affected by the level of her skill, it's better to prioritize her talent and ultimate. Lastly, level up her basic attack. I would recommend leveling up her basic as well, since it's a blast attack, and since she can only use her skill every 3 turns, she will be using this quite a lot. Now we look at her passives. Her first passive grants her 1 stack of Pawn Asset when an enemy target enters the battle, and grants 3 stack of Pawn Asset when the debt collector's turn begins. This will again help with getting to max 50 stacks faster. Her second passive grants her 50% action advance at the start of the battle, which allows her to always take the first turn to set up her skill from the very beginning. It's pretty much a built-in bond back set. Finally, her third passive grants her some additional attack for each stack of Bond Asset, 0.5% for each stack to be exact. So about 25% attack at max 50 stacks, which is nice for extra damage. As for her bonus stats, after maxing out her traces, she gets 22% quantum damage boost, 18% attack, and 10% effect rest for some weird reason. I don't know why. I would personally prefer crit, but well, it is what it is, I guess. Moving on to Jade's Eidolons. Even though her kit was pretty straightforward, maybe her Eidolons can make a difference. Jade's E1 increases her follow-up attack's damage by 32%, and she gains her follow-up attack charge faster. If the debt collector hits 2 targets, Jade gains 1 additional charge, and if they hit a single target, Jade gains 2 charges. This makes up for the situations when there are fewer enemies. It's good but not super impressive. I'll leave the damage difference at the end. Her E2 grants her 18% crit rate after she reaches 15 stack of Pawn Asset, which is pretty much a single use of her technique. I would have loved it if this was in her passive, but still, 36% crit value makes her super easy to build, not to mention increases her damage. Her E3 and E5 are level ups for her traces. Jade's E4 lets all her attacks ignore 12% defense for 3 turns after she uses her ultimate, and since it's 3 turns, you can pretty much have 100% uptime on it. Lastly, her E6 pretty much makes her pop off. She gets 20% quantum rest penetration, and whenever she makes someone a debt collector with her skill, she herself also becomes a debt collector with them. Now we know that she doesn't get the extra speed buff if she herself becomes a debt collector, but in this case, it's a big difference, because now there are 2 debt collectors on the team. Means both her attacks and the other debt collector's attacks will trigger Jade's additional damage. And with the extra rest penetration, all of it increases their overall damage output by a lot. This may seem to be a simple Eidolon, but it grants a ton of buffs to Jade. Here is a damage comparison for all her Eidolons. I personally don't really recommend any of them. Usually a character's initial Eidolons are super OP, but that's not the case for Jade in my opinion. She starts to get some damage spikes, but that's only after her E2. and her E6 is probably her highest damage spike. But if you're planning to go that far, then you don't really need to hear my opinions anyways. By the way, if you've reached to this point of the video and like what you're watching, consider subscribing to the channel, as it does help this channel grow and motivates me to make more content for you guys. Alright, after all that, let's start with our builds. For our relics, now there are basically two options here. The first is going to be the quantum set, is still to this day one of if not the best set for any quantum DPS. The 20% defense ignore is insanely strong. The other option is going to be the follow-up attack set. Since Jade's attacks are consist of multiple hits, the Grand Duke set can also work well. There isn't much of a damage difference between these two sets, but the follow-up attack set shows better results because of the attack increase that it provides. And through my calculations, Jade scales heavily with attack, even more so than damage boost. For planar ornaments, well, there's a new set coming in the next patch that synergizes with her quite well. It increases follow-up attack damage and crit damage, both really beneficial for Jade. For alternatives, there are two options. First is going to be the Sigonia set, which is extremely good for Jade and can outperform the new set in places like Pure Fiction. Since the set wants at least 10 enemies defeated to get the maximum buff, a challenge like Pure Fiction is perfect, as there is a ton of low HP mobs. Lastly, if you can't get any of these two sets, then the Inner Salsado can also be a close contender. The damage boost is low compared to the other two, but it can be a good placeholder until you farm a better set. As for stats, well, here's a build to take reference from. As usual, everything calculated here are based on low rolled relics and F2P Lightcones. So you guys will at least be able to build a better Jade than this. For main stats, since she gets a ton of crit damage from her passive, you want to opt for a crit rate body, a speed boot or attack boot based on your substats, a quantum damage sphere, and an attack rope. As for our stat goals, you want to aim for over or at least close to 3k attack, the standard 134 speed, around 70% or more crit rate, and over 200% crit damage. These stats may look hard to reach, but trust me, she's pretty easy to build. She has a ton of self buffs in her kit, from crit rate to attack to even damage boost, and with all this, reaching these numbers should be easier. For Lightcones, is super easy here as well. Her signature is by far her best in slot. It gives crit, some follow-up attack damage, and allows her follow-up attacks to ignore 20% defense. Pairing this and the quantum set will be crazy with 40% defense ignore. It's pretty much perfect for her. And for the question if you should go for her E1 or her signature, I recommend her Lightcone. It provides some much needed crit rate and makes her easier to build, and the defense ignore increases her damage significantly. For alternatives, well, there's only one choice: the new upcoming Herta store ERUDITION Lightcone. It's an insane attack stat stick which is free to S5, and through my calculations, Jade scales insanely well with attack, even more so than damage boost. Also, this Lightcone provides up to 16% speed at S5, which can allow her to use an attack boot than a speed boot, and higher attack means higher damage. Here's a simple chart comparing pretty much all the ERUDITION Lightcones. You can clearly see that the Herta store Lightcone is literally her second best. There are some 4-star that are pretty close, but as I specified in the remarks, all of them has some kind of condition attached to them. The 4-star Genius's Repose is a good example. It's a great Lightcone since it increases attack and it is competing for the second best slot, but that's only when it is at S5 and the whole passive is active. The others have similar conditions as well. Personally, I don't think this discussion is even needed at all. Simple. If you want to hyper invest in your Jade, then go for a Lightcone instead of her E1. And if you can't, then just use the free Herta store Lightcone. It's her second best option and it's completely free. Now for her proper rotations. Well, Jade has a 140 energy cost ultimate, which is a valuable ability since it not only deals massive damage but also increases the damage multiplier of her follow-up attack. And given the fact that she can't use her skill while it is already active, it pretty much tells you to play her with a skill basic rotation, where she will get her ultimate back around every 3 to 4 turns, depending on how many follow-up attacks she does. You can guarantee a 3-turn ultimate if you were to use an ERR rope on her, but you'll actually end up losing damage overall. Here's a comparison. You literally won't see any difference in turns for the first 3 cycles. That's why I took 5 cycles for this comparison. The only difference you get is 1 extra ultimate proc, but the lack of attack makes for low damage output, and the attack rope build ends up on top. So don't even think about using an ERR rope. She's simple and straightforward to play. Don't overcomplicate things. And finally, let's talk synergies. And by that, let's first discuss which characters are best suited to be the Debt Collector. Now we know that her follow-up attack stacks works based on the number of target hit by the Debt Collector, and that counts for follow-up attacks and ultimates. So we can definitely want characters that can hit multiple targets, and that means other ERUDITION characters. And there are 4 characters that are, in my opinion, perfect for the job. The first character on the list is going to be Argenti. Not only almost all of his attacks are AoE, he gets his 90 cost ultimate really fast, and he shines against multiple targets, just like Jade. There couldn't be a better pairing for Argenti than Jade. My next recommendation is going to be not a 5-star, but a 4-star, Herta. Her skill, ultimate, and her follow-up attacks all are AoE. so she can help Jade generate her follow-up attack charge really fast. And with Jade's additional damage, Herta will be able to get most of the smaller mobs below 50% HP, triggering her follow-up attack more often. Both parties benefits heavily from each other, making this pair definitely worth trying. The next two characters are great, but not as good as the first two. Himeko. She has an AoE ultimate and follow-up attack, which is quite frequent. I wish that her skill be AoE as well, but that's that. She can be a great asset for Jade as well, especially with Ruanmei as a support, as she will help Himeko break the enemy faster with her weakness break efficiency buff, and that would trigger Himeko's follow-up attack, resulting in more charges for Jade. And lastly, we have Jingyuan. Finally, some good use for this guy. Jingyuan has an AoE skill and ultimate, and his follow-up attack, which may be a bit inconsistent at times, can deal massive damage, which will be increased further with Jade's assistance. Not only that, with the extra 30 speed that Jade provides, Jingyuan will be able to take more turns and gain more Lightning Lord stacks, resulting in more damage. It's a pretty good pair if you want a good team for your general. Apart from these, there are some unusual pairs as well, which is going to be Blade. He actually is one of the better characters to pair up with Jade, and vice versa. Jade can be one of Blade's best teammates. I did explain this in one of my previous videos, but let me explain again. We know that Blade also has a follow-up attack, which triggers when his HP decreases for 5 times. And we also know that when Jade makes someone a debt collector, then they lose some HP whenever they attacks the enemy. And this is interesting because the HP loss triggers in separate intervals, 2 separate operations, which lets Blade gain 2 stacks at once, allowing him to do his follow-up attacks more frequently. And Blade's follow-up attacks is AoE, which will give more stacks to Jade, and she will be able to do her follow-up attacks more. It's a perfect synergy. And if you have a Blade but do not have Jingliu to pair him up with, then I highly recommend picking up Jade, as she will be one of the best teammates for him. For your single target follow-up attack units like Topaz and Dr. Ratio, they are not that good, even though having both makes for a lot of constant follow-up attacks. But since Jade can only make one unit the debt collector, a single target unit is just not good enough. And similar things happen with Akron. I did see some comments asking about Jade with Akron, and it's really hard to calculate the difference. Like for sure you can use her with Akron, and with the extra speed buff, you can opt for an attack boot on Akron for more damage. And since she has an AoE ultimate, which is quite frequent, Jade can get a lot of stacks from it. So sure, you can use Jade with Akron, and the damage is going to be great, but that is not because Akron plus Jade is an awesome pair. That's just Akron being Akron. And since Jade can't apply any debuffs, you will feel a bit of inconsistency with getting Akron's ultimate back. And I don't think it's the ideal playstyle for either of these two units. Like if you want to play Jade properly, pair her with another ERUDITION unit like Herta or Argenti. And if you are looking for a great support for Akron, then I don't think Jade is the one. The ideal support for Akron is going to be from the Nihility path. So maybe this new guy who is coming in the next patch. Who knows? Now since I discussed mostly dual DPS combinations, let's look at some supports that are best for these teams. 2 Harmony units. Either Robin or Ruanmei are going to be the staple for any of such teams. Robin is better in general, but Ruanmei can be great as well. For sustain, there is no better option than Aventurine. He has a lot of follow-up attacks in his kit, which means even he can be a debt collector. His team-wide sustain capabilities are unmatched, and he perfectly synergizes with Robin. But if you don't have him, then any other sustain can work. Lastly, before finishing this section, let's talk about Hypercarry Jade. Yes, you can definitely play Jade as a Hypercarry, even though playing her in a dual DPS team is better. Since she won't get the speed buff if she herself becomes the debt collector, you definitely want a Bronya in this team to always action advance Jade. Since Jade is an SP positive character, you won't have to worry about skill points. Also with Bronya, you can add other speed or attack buffers to the team, like Hanya, Asta or even Ruanmei. Each have their own types of utility that they can offer. Also, just as I said earlier, if you have Aventurine, then you can make him the debt collector and can still play a Hypercarry team with 2 supports and 1 sustain. Playing Jade as a Hypercarry is definitely an option, but there are definitely other better ways to play her. Overall, Jade is an awesome damage dealer, or sub DPS, whatever you want to call her. Her damage output is insane when played properly. She has some great synergies with old characters, and has the potential to make ERUDITION path as a whole shine in a new light. And that's all I have to say about Jade. Since there wasn't much to her kit and build, I went in a bit more detail with her synergies, and I really do hope that you find this video helpful. Do share your own thoughts about Jade. Will you be pulling for her or skipping her for future units? If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.